Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this seminar that's organised within the frame of the French presidency of the Council of the European Union, which is going to be devoted to 1 year of Brexit, stock taking, and where are we heading. I'm going to give the floor immediately to Mr. Olivier Dussopt, who's the Delegate Minister for Public Accounts. Ladies and gentlemen, Member of Parliament, Director General, dear friend, Madam Director General, ladies and gentlemen, Directors General, Interregional Director, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and indeed an honour for me to be able to welcome you here to the Ministry of Finance and Recovery for us to discuss the situation post-Brexit and to do a first stock taking and draw some initial conclusions. France has got the presidency of the European Union at the moment, and the French government has chosen to have a lively debate with citizens, businesses and public authorities around a number of issues that are of interest to Europeans. I felt it was very important during this presidency to spend some time talking about the consequences of the UK's leaving the European Union. I remember vividly the 1st of January 2021. I went to Calais with Clément Beaune, the Secretary of State for European Affairs, and we looked at the Eurotunnel company there. There are a number of people who were with me at that time on the 1st of January 2021. I don't know if you've forgotten how very apprehensive we were. I was, at any rate. We'd been waiting for this date for some time and with great anxiety in the case of Europeans. The United Kingdom was leaving the European Union, and it had been a very troubled transition. Brexit occurred 5 years after the British people voted to leave the European Union. It had been postponed 3 times in a row. There was lots of talk about a hard Brexit. There was a year of transition. And finally, at the very last minute, there was an agreement reached, Trade and Cooperation Agreement on the 24th of December 2020. Thanks to this, zero customs duties applied to most of the goods traded between the two countries, subject to compliance with preferential rules of origin. But customs controls had to be put in place once again, and customs formalities had to be put in place, and Great Britain became a third country. The 1st of January 2021 meant that we were putting in place a border with the European Union, whereas there had been no border for almost 30 years, with a country that was one of the major trading partners of the Union. For member countries, the reintroduction of this external border, both at land and at sea, was counterintuitive compared to the developments of customs and the single market over so many years. All of a sudden, we were imposing customs and phytosanitary controls and customs duties and various formalities for goods and people. The European Union has been built around the customs union. The customs union is its foundation, a foundation to its success and the basis of the freedoms of the internal market and shared regulations and work of our businesses. I realised that being able to cross borders freely, knowing that our regulations were mutually compatible, and the trust that underpinned the opening of our markets was a major acquis of our European identity. We're going to be listening to a number of round tables, and I hope that in the course of the round tables we will be able to hear the view of various countries and businesses and take stock of the outcome of Brexit after year on. I'm very much attached to have a stock taking that scrutinises the situation, looking at the viewpoint of businesses, importers, exporters, people in charge of logistics, customs officials. Our main concern has always been to help them in carrying out their mission, which is for European customs, given the new state of play with Brexit. But we also need to be forward-looking. We need to draw conclusions. The border is there, and the process is not completed fully yet. And certainly we can learn lessons about the role of customs in the building of Europe, and I'll come back to this in a minute. The first point I would like to underscore is that Brexit is a challenge. It's the greatest challenge we've encountered in customs over the last years. This is not a self-serving exaggeration, although indeed the customs have done a remarkable job of work. But first and foremost, we had to cope with a very tricky logistics situation. The trading across the channel is based on open borders. Crossing times are very short, 35 minutes under the tunnel, and there's a very quick turnaround time, about 3 minutes. This is the roll-on, roll-off models with loaded lorries with their drivers on maritime crossings. All of this has to work like clockwork, and if it doesn't, a number of economic sectors, perishable food and fishing, for instance, rely on it. Any delay, any detail that doesn't work out can actually jeopardize a whole business model. And we couldn't accept that lorries would have to wait for a long time to cross the channel. But also we had to make sure that the goods were compliant with the new requirements, compliant with our regulations and our wish to protect consumers. So we had to keep a logistics model and fluid crossings, but also making sure that we were protecting our markets and consumers and being compliant. The second point is that Brexit need to be prepared in numerous places. There are many points of entry and exit into and from the Union. I stress this because it just shows how hard the preparation was and that all member countries were involved. Some of the points of entry have seen an increase in trading flows from third countries, whereas in other cases completely new controls had to be put in place. We didn't know beforehand how the formalities would be distributed over the various points of entry, and we didn't know how goods and people flows were going to be reorganised following Brexit. So we really had to anticipate, and we worked on this very hard under the aegis of the European Commission. The third point is that the scale of the task was huge, and this exerted pressure on the resources of customs authorities. There too we had to anticipate. That was the watchword. There's an awful lot of trading just for the Channel. 80% of trade between the Union and the United Kingdom. We've got 4.2 million heavy-duty vehicles every year and 30 million passenger crossings. All member countries had to think about how they would allocate resources to cope with Brexit. In the case of France, we've recruited 700 additional customs officers over a 3-year period. We began doing this as of 2018. But we also needed to have new facilities and infrastructure. The existing facilities were not designed for the new formalities. The Eurotunnel was inaugurated in 1994. There was already the single internal market, so we had to provide for car parks for the lorries. We had to have customs offices and veterinary services 24/7. This meant that altogether we had to be very agile to rise to these challenges. We had to do it together because all the players realised the huge potential economic risk, and they acted together. And this kind of conference is very valuable because we can look at what's happened from different viewpoints. The European Commission, customs authorities in member countries, institutional partners and trading partners, businesses and those who manage the trade over the Channel have all got to work together and bring in their own specific viewpoint. So what stock taking can we do a year into Brexit, and what should we highlight? I think that we have learnt lessons. We've realised that our traditional model for customs border crossings was not adapted to the new situation, and we've been managing customs formalities in a different way. For instance, the Irish customs have developed an innovative system adapted to the specificity of what we call the land bridge. In other words, Irish lorries have to go through Great Britain often to get to the continent. Technical and operational exchanges between the countries have been very fruitful. And I would like to particularly say how useful it was to have the input from Ireland and the Irish customs authorities. Unfortunately not here today because of health restrictions. In France, the border has been designed to anticipate customs formalities with lots of upstream electronic formalities. We call this the smart border. And the only lorries that need to be stopped are those that require additional customs formalities or specific control, even though we take on board, of course, the sanitary and phytosanitary dimension of Brexit. This smart border is the outcome of very in-depth work with the support of the European Commission. We've adapted application of customs rules to coordinate interfacing and tests. The second lesson we can learn is that member countries have shown that they can provide a common response with the European Commission and with their economic partners. At European level, member countries have really worked together. The Netherlands, Ireland and Belgium in particular, those who are very hard hit by Brexit, and we've worked very closely with them, and I'd really like to thank them for their participation today. The Commission, Director General Sir, has been very valuable in its action to coordinate the European response. And I'm delighted that we've been able to organise today's event in close cooperation with your teams and the Director General of Taxation and the Customs Union. We will be giving you the floor in just a minute, but thank you very much indeed for this partnership, which has been outstanding. The Commission has coordinated the levelling up of all the IT customs systems in Europe and at national level, so that on the 31st of December 2020, midnight, we were ready to consider the UK as a third country. You've also helped European companies cope with the new situation. As of 2019, member countries under the aegis of the Commission have kept businesses informed about the changes likely in the crossings, border crossings with the UK. The Union together realised very quickly that resources were going to have to be allocated to cope with Brexit. They realised it would have an impact on many economic sectors. And I'd like to take advantage of the opportunity to welcome the setting in place by the European Union of the Brexit Adjustment Reserve to the tune of €5 billion. The third lesson that we can learn is that the current situation shows that most European companies have been very well prepared for Brexit. It's paid off. All of the preparation has paid off. Many of them deployed huge amounts of energy to be compliant with new customs requirements and to integrate customs clearance into their production and logistics models, despite the induced costs. Brexit has meant that many companies have had to think long and hard about where they're going to produce, what suppliers they're going to have, who their clients are going to be. They have managed to absorb the new costs related to customs formalities, and often there's been a reconfiguration of production choices. So, for instance, some logistics activities have now been relocated to Europe, whereas they used to be in the United Kingdom. We should also underscore that there's been an excellent partnership, in the case of France, with professional federations, employers' associations. I think that information has been spread to their members thanks to these associations. So that's all quite positive, but not all companies are on an equal footing when it comes to Brexit. Public authorities had for a priority to inform those companies who were primary importers, in other words, who until then had not imported from third countries, and all of a sudden found that they were going to have to comply with completely new requirements. More than 40,000 companies are in this situation in France. They are companies that trade with the UK and had never traded with third countries before. The second priority was to provide advice for all companies that do trade with the United Kingdom about the best customs clearance models for their particular trade. I think that thanks to this, most European companies were well prepared. The fourth lesson we can learn is that trading has resumed and is now stable at a fairly high level, and this was true as of the end of the first quarter of this year 2021. With the economic crisis and the health crisis plus Brexit, economic ties between the UK and the EU fell markedly in 2021. If you compare the first 10 months of 2021 with 2019, you can see a 15% falling off of trade between the EU to the UK and 29% the other way around. However, logistics very quickly became operational, and 3.6 million lorries crossed the channel in 2021. So that's almost back to normal, just a few weeks after the 1st of January. The slowdown, permanent slowdown, did not occur. 80% of the lorries got over the border without being stopped at all, and the contingency plans and worst case scenarios did not have to be triggered, which was a huge relief. Customs formalities have increased markedly, but customs authorities have not been overwhelmed. In the case of France, the number of transit declarations increased by 62% because of Brexit, and for import customs clearance flows 29%. Export customs declarations increased by almost 1 million, and this shows the huge scale of the project. To sum up, the economic impact of Brexit is huge, as was expected, but the customs authorities have responded well, and this means that trading has continued and we still have good trading potential with the United Kingdom. This shows the full advantage of the trade and cooperation agreement. We have to apply preferential rules of origin, which is additional formalities, but just imagine what would have happened without this agreement. If we had applied the common external tariff, that would have been a huge problem for many of our businesses and would have led to a collapse of many business models for European companies and a collapse of our trading with the UK. The fifth lesson I'd like to draw, and I've underscored this over the last months, is that Brexit is not behind us. It's still very topical, and this is another reason for having the conference today. We need to improve the services provided to businesses and to be fully mobilised so that we can respond to any transient difficulties. For instance, we need to strengthen the smart border that we're implementing. And we want to anticipate all of the customs formalities so that we don't get bottlenecks. We need to have resilient trading with the United Kingdom. And particularly as we emerge from the health crisis, we have to be very careful about any tensions that arise over the coming months, because passenger traffic will increase as we emerge from the health crisis, and this could be a strain on customs authorities. Once the crisis is behind us, we will see the full impact of Brexit, because at the moment passenger flows are much lower than usual. European customs also have to cope with the gradual reintroduction of customs formalities with the UK. For instance, some import formalities as of the 1st of January 2022, without too many major problems, thanks to good cooperation with British services. About 1/3 of vehicles were slowed down and held up at the beginning, but only 10% are held up because of customs formalities at the moment, and this figure is falling all the time. We must be prepared for the full reintroduction of customs formalities between the UK and the EU, which will be happening very soon. Before handing over the floor to the Director General, I'd like to conclude by sharing with you some of my considerations about Brexit. This crisis has led to a strengthening of our customs capacities. It's very disruptive after 30 years of deepening the internal market, and it calls into question the way in which we work. It's led to a lot of considerations and hard thinking about how we manage border controls, and it could be applied to other facets of our work as customs authorities. And Brexit, as of 2018, gave rise to a number of challenges I've just mentioned, but other disruptive effects are happening. They're perhaps less visible, but they are restructuring the Union. For instance, growing digitalisation of our procedures, diversification of our trading partners, and in some cases, countries that have undercutting regulation, more and more sectoral regulations, and e-commerce. In France, we have deliberately chosen to protect the priority missions of the customs authorities and to allocate sufficient resources over a multi-annual strategy so that we can improve the facilities and the capacity of the customs authorities, particularly as regards e-commerce, which is one of our priorities. So there are all these changes happening in the customs environment, and there are other critical issues such as protecting the single market. We need to protect the single market. The French President Emmanuel Macron has set a priority, which is to protect European sovereignty. And obviously this is closely related to current considerations to strengthen the customs union. We need to have very demanding requirements regarding control and national customs carried out at the common borders of the union. We cannot be taken by surprise by fraud which would benefit from our economic openness but would undermine the effectiveness of our rules and endanger Europeans. The stakes are too high in terms of health and migratory flows. I know that the Commission has launched work along these lines involving the Council of the European Union. I'd like to stress that we fully support this work. It's important to strengthen and broaden customs cooperation, and this conference is fully part and parcel of this task. We need, over the longer period, to rise to the new challenges of the customs union, and we will manage to do this, just as we have succeeded in coping with the challenges to which Brexit gave rise. Thank you very much for participating in this event, taking stock of Brexit from the customs point of view with the two roundtables. The Director General for Taxation and the Customs Union, Mr. Gerasmos Thomas, will now be sharing with us his vision of what has happened with Brexit. And I will hand you the floor now, sir, and thank you once again for the excellent quality of cooperation that we have had, working in the same spirit of protecting European sovereignty. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Minister, and good morning, everybody. Director General of the French Treasury, Director General of the French Customs, the Dutch Customs, Director General of the Belgian Customs, colleagues, representatives of the private sector, representatives of the French Customs. I think that the Minister has said everything I wanted to say. We didn't coordinate in advance, but I have almost nothing to add. Maybe just to say, say the same things, but in English this time. What I'm taking away from his speech in terms of past experience and future learning, I've noted a few important things from this experience, which I've only been involved in since very recently, and so my contribution to it is very much marginal. Nonetheless, those working with me and for me, and all the customs authorities we've worked with, I think have been exemplary in their work. The Commission has sought to support Member States' customs authorities, private sector companies, and indeed European citizens. And as you said, together, collectively, with Member States, all of them, because all the EU Member States have had to make changes. Working closely together and working on the basis of greater trust between all the departments involved, we've had to work together to meet this challenge. That's true of those working in the public sector, but also the private sector. So, if I may, I'm now going to switch to English for the bulk of my speech, also for those listening to us from abroad. First of all, however, allow me to welcome the initiative taken by the French presidency to look back at 1 year of Brexit, full Brexit if you like, since the 1st of January 2021. there have been a number of structural changes made.
By 16% over 1 year, more, 1/5 of export increase. Import decreases from the UK substantial, between 40 and 50%. The structure of change substantially changed between us and the UK. The flows of trade changed substantially between the countries. The routes have changed, and this meant enormous change for us in the customs, but also for the private sector, the importers, the industry, the supply chains. An enormous challenge that worked very, very smoothly thanks to the joint efforts of Europe and, in this particular area, also the UK colleagues, because the cooperation also with the UK customs has worked quite well at the end, even if the origin of this relationship is very sad for Europe, of this new relationship is very sad for Europe. The last 12 months has given us a wealth of experience and insights, and we have to accept and look forward to a new area towards an EU customs environment that can deal better with crisis and build a new relationship with the UK. We cannot go back, and I think we have to build from where we are today. But let's look a bit in the past. The EU and the member states, we made big investments preparing for this big bang Brexit date that kept changing from time to time, but eventually it came. We had great uncertainty, and we had to ensure that businesses were prepared, not only that we were prepared. We had to adapt our IT systems. You had to create new border points. You had to make new facilities for storage, new facilities for phytosanitary inspections, and the private sector had to adapt its logistics and administrative model. We ran big and successful, I believe, communication campaigns, looking at the result that, finally we didn't have problems. Many member states did that. The Commission did that, tried to have a successful information of our customers and citizens. And when we do this together, we showed that we can do it better. And the European model worked well. The same way happened when introduced the euro, a huge challenge with different campaigns from the different member states and associations and business associations, but we made it, and it was smooth and it was successful. And all the member states involved made similar exercises, but I do want to pay particular tribute today to France, that invested hundreds of millions in preparations. More than 1,000 extra officials were recruited and trained, and the new infrastructure was built on time, and it was functioning. Other member states, the Netherlands, were also made similar efforts, Germany, Ireland, Belgium, and this infrastructure was there, was built on time, it was functioning. And a lot of foresight was shown by our authorities, the customs authorities. They looked ahead on what has to happen, on how the problems will unfold, and they prepared for that. So I had the pleasure to visit the port of Calais, as I visited the port of Rotterdam, on Antwerp, of Zeebrugge, and I saw how not only the European customs adapted, but also took the opportunity to make and to start making, because it's not finished, but our border smarter, and adapting to new challenges that we face. So a lot of work, unfortunately, was needed in 2021. The situation was not fully stable. We thought we had agreed and stable withdrawal agreement and the Northern Irish Protocol, and things would be stable once we made this investment. But unfortunately, we had to adapt, and we do have to adapt as of today. to an evolving situation from the UK side. And I think this good cooperation between what we call the G5 primarily, all the countries that are facing and the most of the trade with the UK, but also the other countries, we have to continue to adapt and develop our systems. We are proud in the European Commission on the relationship that has been built, on the trust that has been built, and the proactive approach. In these issues of Brexit, I would say that instinctively the customs authorities act as one. And when occasionally, you know, there are attempts, let's say, from the UK side to divide and make bilateral agreements with one or the other member states, I'm very happy to see that immediately the colleagues from the customs, they inform the others. And therefore, I think it's a great experience that I had the privilege to see, and you know, after all these years of investments that the authorities have made. You know, the current relationship with the UK is evolving, and I think we have to be to follow this. We want to achieve a mature and stable bilateral relationship because it is one of the big trading partners, is a strategic partner for Europe, but we are not there yet. The withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol implementation face some challenges, particularly in the implementation in Northern Ireland. The Northern Irish Protocol is in negotiation as we speak between the Vice President Maros Sefcovic and the UK Foreign Secretary. Europe has made within the limits of the protocol very important proposals focusing on solutions on the ground, trying to see what are the problems for citizens. For example, we make a very generous offer, and this was agreed upon, on medicines. We didn't remain, you know, as Europe, we recognize the need on this health crisis that we have to serve the citizens in Northern Ireland, and we modified within the legal agreements that we have to the maximum degree what it was needed, so to make sure that the Northern Irish citizens had access to medicines without any undue problems. We have made concrete proposals on the goods. We went further than we went in the beginning of January on the issues of definition of goods at no risk, on the notions of the UK trusted traded regime in order to facilitate the trade between UK and Northern Ireland when it comes to goods that are delivered for end consumers in Northern Ireland. I think together, again, working with the member states, we have made significant improvements that are possible within the protocol. They are very much appreciated by the Northern Ireland business community, and they are the basis of discussions as we speak. But of course, you know, we have made an agreement, an international agreement that has to be honored, and therefore we are looking for solutions within this framework. On the more positive side, I think the implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is smooth. We do not have the same political difficulties, and I think this merits, it will be discussed in the round table as we go forward, but I think the preparation that we have made in that area before the Brexit date is already paying off substantially, and the problems that we have are normal implementation problems and not rediscussions as we have in the case of the Northern Irish Protocol. As the Minister said, we should not forget that unfortunately Brexit and its unprecedented changes it introduced did not happen in a social vacuum. We had the global pandemic that you know, put another test to our customs authorities, and unexpected test that put our services, new challenges. And we have managed to, as customs union, as customs authorities, Commission and Member States, we managed to deal with this very successfully as well. We introduced new measures to granting duty and VAT relief on imports for key products for the pandemic very quickly with the unanimous support of the Member States. We implemented and monitored the effect of these measures, and the numbers speak. More than 23 billion of imports of essential supplies ran smoothly to the Union since January 2020. When vaccines finally came to the market, again, customs played a fundamental role to ensure imports of all the supply chain for the vaccines. 860 million doses were facilitated through the imports, EU customs cleared imports for goods and material for vaccines. 1.7 billion doses of vaccines were exported from the EU to the third countries. More than 50% from the second biggest exporter, China, 3 times more than the US. Facts are there, and Europe has proven that we have managed in the best way the crisis. 80% of the European people are vaccinated, more than 80%, and 20% have the third doses. And at the same time, we are the biggest exported in the world. Very smooth, substantially for the imports, but also for the exports through the smooth operation of our customs authorities. This has permitted us to save lives in Europe. The WHO estimates that EU fatalities were 50% lower, at least according to WHO, the World Health Organization. More than 500,000 lives have been saved. So we have, through this year, seen that the European customs have absorbed very successfully and very responsibly the twin shocks of Brexit and COVID. Our capacities have been tested. Our means have been tested. Sometimes priorities had to be reassigned in order to achieve these incredible positive results. And here the question is, what do we do about the future? Some people expect the situation to go up to the old reality, but I would agree with the Minister that this is not the right way forward. We need to build on these successes. We need to foresee the challenges of the future, and there are many challenges coming forward, in the coming years. E-commerce is less important than the COVID crisis, and is less important than the Brexit crisis, but it has been a test for the capacity of our customs to deal with volumes. We have the Green Deal, and the digital transformation will substantially transform our economies, our supply chains. The sustainability element will be introduced in every private sector decision in the supply chains, in adapting the supply chains of our products, of our energy, and this eventually will have to be confronted and controlled by customs. Similarly, the digital transformation will give huge opportunities to customs, and responsibility to us to adapt our systems to take advantage of the new data that will be generated, and show us new ways of working together among customs, but together with the business, monitoring the supply chains. I think we have recognized, together with the customs authorities, the need to keep this proactive approach to the changing world. I'm very thankful to all the authorities, the customs authorities and ministers responsible, that they support this approach of trying to be proactive going forward. and the support of the member states that we had to set up a wise person group under the responsibility of Commissioner Gentiloni to get recommendations on how better to handle these challenges going forward, a kind of reform of our legislation, but not only. We had agreed that we will do some type of legislation at the end of the year, but it has to be more deep and take advantage of what we have learned and of what we have to do. The Minister mentioned the area of common risk management is very much needed given the geopolitical developments that we see these days. The need for Europe to control better its supply chains, to protect our border, and recognize the increasing role of customs, not only to be our fiscal agent to collect fiscal and customs duties, but also increasingly to be the agency responsible for the control of the security and safety of our products, the so-called non-fiscal duties of customs that are becoming increasingly important. So we are committed to work during this period to come up with ideas. This will happen, fortunately, I would say, during the French presidency that will allow us, starting from a group of recommendations for a group of persons to make it a concrete agenda for, the member states and the Commission. We have a lot of work to do in the rest of the year, but I think already with your speech and the cooperation that we have with your colleagues during this semester, I think we will clarify the priorities and set the basis for a profound improvement. I wouldn't say reform, but improvement, positive improvement, building on the experience that we have to drive the European customs forward and deal with the challenges that we face within Europe. I would say, like in other fields, I mentioned the Green Deal and the digital transformation. Our ambition in the Commission, my ambition with my colleagues, is not only to set the right basis for these improvements, but also to lead internationally. And we have a parallel work that we are doing with the European colleagues to have a reform at an international level. The World Customs Organization facing similar challenges, and I think as we do in the area of climate, in the area of digital, in other areas, we want to lead by example. So if we take the right approach forward in Europe, and we can also lead with this change at an international level. So I want to thank you, Minister, for organizing this event. I hope we will still learn a lot today from these roundtables. I think our cooperation has to be intense at all levels, at the level of the customs, of the Director Generals of the customs, of the ministers, and the French presidency will organize the right context to have these discussions at the highest level. Some of the issues are profoundly political, but they are necessary. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on an excellent idea of organizing this meeting. Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister and Director General. So these are two very comprehensive and accurate analyses of the situation in terms of the challenges raised by Brexit for governments, customs organizations, business, of course, so we will come back to that, and to the journey we've had so far that's been successful, and above all to the journey that we still have to make. And we heard, listening from you two, that there's still a long way to go. And still a lot to do in terms of meeting the upcoming challenges. We are now going to get down to the more detailed side of a review of the past Brexit year. What have been the challenges? How have we been able to adjust to the new customs and health difficulties that have come in? So for the first roundtable, I'd like to call on the participants to join me here on the stage. So here's the first roundtable, which is about looking at what's happened with Brexit. As we heard from the Minister and the Director General, it's clear that there are impacts on government administrations, but it's also important to see what's happened to businesses. And we have a roundtable here now, which will enable us with our guests to take a look at the way in which 2021 was prepared and got through, how we managed to cope with the problems that this raised. So I have with us Amelia de Coulabarta, who is Deputy Director General of Treasury, who will talk about the economic impact in macroeconomic terms. We'll see how businesses have coped with this, but there'll also be a business, a group that's been and still is impacted by Brexit. We have Frédéric Jacot, who is Customs Director for Airbus, and he'll tell us how Airbus have got ready for and got through 2021. And then we have two customs DGs, Isabelle Brun-Lamer for French Customs, and Christian van der Varen, who is Director General of Customs and Excise in Belgium. And they will give us their views on the way in which their countries and administrations prepared for this and what actually happened in 2021. So let me start with Maria Lacoula-Barton and first ask her to give us an idea of the impact of Brexit on businesses, because the UK, of course, is a major trading partner. What has been the actual impact of this? Thank you, Jean-Michel. Thank you for inviting me to the round table this morning. And quite definitely, Brexit has been a major source of concern and still is. Maybe before we look at the macroeconomic impacts, by way of an introduction, let me remind you of the context of this very special situation and negotiation. These were exceptional negotiations because rather than being about a new agreement to strengthen trade links, it was about the opposite, about separating, loosening trade links whilst trying to avoid the negative impact on business in terms of trade and investment. Then there was the length of the negotiation, simply because this was a very major negotiation partner with whom we wanted loosened links. So we tried to and managed to do so very quickly. It took less than a year for the trade and cooperation agreement, because usually it takes 5 years. And this shows how determined the partners were not to come under WTO rules, and the fact the UK wanted freedom of decision, and despite the fact that the UK and the EU are very physically close, and we had to be innovative because this was a very close relationship, and so the trade and cooperation agreement sought original solutions and arrangements so as to ensure fair competition with specifics concerning rules of origin, for example, electric batteries. So this explains that we knew we were going to be involved in negotiations that would lead to disruption of trade and investment, because it was about separating from former internal market member, and the whole purpose of the talks was to reduce the inevitable disruption. Now, coming to your question, in terms of the macroeconomic implications, the Minister and the Director General gave some figures. And we will look at the context in which business was obviously impacted by COVID. So in the first quarter of 2021, let's say following the agreement and withdrawal, there was about a 20% reduction of trade from the EU to the UK, whereas for the rest of the world it's about 4%. And imports from the UK to the EU fell by 36%, whereas there was a 2% increase for non-European imports. And EU to UK exports fell less, probably because the arrangements were set up slowly in the UK, and also because the UK found it very hard to find replacement suppliers after the EU ones are gone. So there was a sharp drop in the first quarter, and then throughout the rest of the year there was a recovery against the background of COVID, of course, and the various new measures that were brought in the UK to contain the virus. So in October of last year, EU-UK trade was not back to 2019 levels, unlike between the EU and the rest of world partners. So EU-UK trade, in particular in textiles and automotive, but also in the aviation industry, there were problems with exports once again down a lot in 2021 after the unexpected drop in 2020. And as far as imports are concerned, it's about textiles and automotives, but compounded by problems in terms of mechanical systems, pharmaceutical industries, machinery, etc. And so UK exports were down towards the EU by 21%. And in the other direction, there was a slower decline, but still below 2019 levels by 20%. Okay, when you look at that, and also when you look at the sizes of companies concerned, would you say that you can draw a distinction between the impact in terms of the size? Are large corporations more or less impacted than SMEs? Could you give us an idea of how that has worked out? Well, I don't have any details, but we've also been looking at this through the trade preferences, through the trade and investment agreement. These were fairly extensively used to 68% very quickly, and we're now at 76% stable, which is what the minister was saying. That's to say that there are quite a lot of companies that were trading with the UK that didn't have other international trading partners. So for the first time, they were exporting and had to get used to the tools, and in particular the use of trade preferences, which meant that today, with this being about 3/4 of what it used to be, we feel that we've been able to maintain a lot of zero-rate imports, but there are still importers who have to pay customs duties, whereas they could come under the agreement. The minister referred to the fact that Brexit had changed the situation a lot, because the companies concerned, whether they were British or the UK, had to look at their value chain again, and they had to reorganize their supply chain. What's your view of that? What did you find? Well, this is a major trend that's underway, driven by Brexit, but that was also driven by trade tension growing between China and the US, which meant that a lot of businesses saw that in their value chain there were a lot of stages that were subject to these problems. And of course, with COVID closing down economies, as the pandemic spread, this aggravated the situation. As far as the UK situation is concerned, specifically, we're working under a trade agreement, which, while it is a free trade agreement of some kind, it's special in that it's zero duty, zero quotas. It's quite open, which means that you don't have to completely change your value or supply chains. But businesses are looking at that and trying to diversify the way they work and their suppliers. Thank you very much, Muriel. Okay, well, let us go to Frédéric Jacot, who's Customs Director for Airbus, and we'll look at what's happened to a very large European and international company and find out from you what happened to Airbus. What was the impact of Brexit on Airbus? So could you take us through your analysis of the challenges and the way that you coped? And perhaps mention any support that you received from France or Europe in general. Okay, well, that is some question, isn't it? So yes, Airbus is a European group by essence of 4 founding countries. So it was a major shock to the system for the company to have to deal with a border now between 3 founding countries and one other. All the wings in Airbus are built by us for all our aircraft, and without wings, Airbus is a bus. And we also build satellites in the UK, so there were major logistics flows involved, and we're talking about size that is quite exceptional, size of the objects transported. And as soon as the referendum result came in, we in Airbus realized what the impact would be, and at the highest level in the company, from the outset, we realized we had to respond quickly, and not just within the Airbus group itself, but across the whole supply chain, all the suppliers, so as to include them through GIFAS here in France and in other countries, BDRE, for example, in Germany, to make sure that all these suppliers that are not always large companies, because we like to use small local businesses that were not used to going through customs formalities, because these were all local deliveries or intra-community at most. So those were taken on board with the help of our procurement department. So we made sure that everyone was informed so that the suppliers knew how to keep working with us and we could keep turning out aircraft. This was particularly important, and then I can say something about the impact, because you were talking about the agreement that was signed in aviation. We don't use preferential origin. It's more special arrangements, which is called active perfectioning, as we call it. But I was talking with one of the UK managers in the satellite business, and we asked how these certificates of origin were used, but knowing that in the company we have to make sure that there is a preferred origin, and we have to make sure that the supplier has understood what is meant when they write, I was going to say made in, no, they didn't say made in do, it's a preferred origin, so that they could understand it wasn't just about a compliance or quality control, but transformation under the agreement. So having been a lawyer in a previous life, I did a lot of work on preferred or preferential origin, and I'm very much aware of the difficulties involved. And of course, so once that's properly managed, it means you don't have any specific customs duties. And you were asking, oh yes, but the way you prepared for this, what did you do with the supply chain? because we know, as was said earlier, there was a major problem in finding customs clearance specialists, in particular in the UK, but not only there. So how did you solve this problem? Yes, well, the problem of change in the supply chain, I mean, you know where our plants are. These are not small companies or sites that you can close and then change. Even in the UK, where we build all the wings, and of course we are very much appreciative of the technological skills in the UK, so we didn't want to move our UK plants. And so we had to make sure that the supply chains still operated. And apart from customs duties, what we identified as the major issues was quality and availability of the data to make the customs declarations as early as possible in the process, as to avoid anything being blocked at frontiers. And this was the biggest issue that we brought up across the supply chain, to make sure that data that weren't necessarily controlled with respect to the physical flows, because we used to use things like Infrastrat in the past. We have to make sure we had this data from the outset. So there's a major investment there, and we also had to get ahead of the game in terms of resources, in particular with the forwarding agents that we work with in other countries, because we use forwarding agents a lot. And we had to deal with the issues relating to the labour market in the countries, the UK and Germany, less so in France and Spain. We found it easier to find people there. But it was a big issue. And then what we also tried to do, I mean, it might seem a detail, but it's important, was to take another look at our contracts and make sure that we had everything right for transport and customs formalities, and make sure that in terms of procurement, we had everything done right in the UK, but also with the transportation at the French frontier, for everything coming into France, but also for the others. And in terms of sales, we tried to use the DAP system. And this was done across all our divisions. I don't want to wash any dirty in public, but we saw that some of our divisions found it harder to change their terms of trade, and this is where the major difficulty lay. Because there were flows that were not properly controlled, and this was a big change, because when you alter a contract, there are other things that have to be modified, and it's always a bit complicated. So what's called Incoterms, that is a key issue, and it's even more key now because the British brought back customs formalities for imports, which meant additional paperwork. So it's important to know who's responsible for what. Yes, so we are very pleased that on the 1st of January, they brought back customs formalities through the VGMS, because in 2020 we had problems with that. And then we worked hard with your people, and I'd like to thank you for that, because we worked with the major accounts department, making sure that we're up to speed with our customs formalities in the group and our suppliers, and we got good support from the ministry, and we also worked with the people doing the dry runs in Caen. I worked with your people in the team to see what would happen with these wings that were expected out of the production plants, real wings, so with special trucks. So we had to modify the ships that were supplying our trucks, and it went very well. We had a certain number of dry runs, and this meant we were able to use the land border, as you call it, for all our product flows. And on the 1st of January, we had some problems, but it wasn't because of the customs border per se. It was more because of the shippers or blizzards in northern Germany, where we had some suppliers based, and internal problems that we hadn't identified. IT connections that we hadn't thought of, but in pure customs terms, everything went well. It was very positive in that respect. Is that an answer to your question? Okay, since the beginning of the year, with the new UK formalities, how are things working out? So at the beginning of this year, for Airbus as such, we don't really see any different, because as of the 1st of January last year, we decided, along with the British authorities, to get our customs declarations in earlier, not go with the simplified offer. And so we thought that would not be a good idea. And as the minister said, there was a certain percentage, there was 30%, which is probably similar to what we saw. There were transport companies and suppliers a bit confused, said, okay, here's a customs formality we never used to have, and we'll have to deal with. But it didn't get reported to me as a logistics problem or supply delays, so I think that was well managed. Yes, it's true, it was about 30% in the first few days. Yes, that's to say drivers who turned out without having gone through the formalities or not properly filled in today. We're talking about 2-3%. So the situation is much better. You don't have drivers turning up without any paperwork. So we can say today that it's working well. But there's still some way to go. But as we'll see in the second roundtable, we still have the health formalities, the 1st of July. Yes, there's still the question of VAT forms, which can be a problem. Even if this is improving, you know, how to manage all this paperwork. There are envelopes, as we call it, but things are improving. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation, and now I'm going to turn to the two Directors General we have here. Perhaps I'll begin with Isabelle Brown-Lemaire and ask her if she could tell us how she perceives the problems that the French customs were going to encounter with Brexit. Jean-Michel is the head of the Brexit project, so I'm speaking subject to his approval, and I hope that I will faithfully reflect the situation and explain what we've done. Obviously, it was a subject of great concern in 2020 and prior to that as well. There were three major topics to be handled. First of all, to make sure that we were up to scratch, that we had the means and resources to take on the new tasks in terms of human resources, material resources. I don't need to go into the details of what Brexit represents in Calais and Dunkirk. We've got 3 new offices there. We've put in place a border with customs officers, slightly differently from a standard customs office, because it's open 24/7. obviously, what we needed to do is mobilize human resources, 700 new customs officers. It's hard to get the budget. Once you've got the budget, that's great, but then you have to recruit, and you also have to train people over a period of years. The problems we had was the stop-and-go process with Brexit, which kept getting postponed. So we recruited people, we trained them, and then it was postponed. And so we had to find other tasks for them to do. And we, to some extent, lost the benefit of the recruitment and training, at least for a time being, because we had to delay by a year the deployment. IT as well. Obviously, our IT systems were really strained, and we had to completely overhaul them so that they could cope. Another subject Jean-Michel is very familiar with. He's now named Regional Director of the North of France, because that's where it all happened. So we had to protect the infrastructures in the Nord de France, the Hauts-de-France, the North of France region, infrastructures and facilities that weren't really suited to border crossings in this conventional sense. We had to be very innovative, creative, and what we've done is we've put in place what we call the smart border. Obviously, we're very smart. I don't know whether it's the right name. It's a rather strange expression, but we're very proud of the solution as such that you've described yourself. It involves anticipation, preempting anticipation. Everything you said reflects what we've been communicating on. We want to avoid lorries being stopped and held up, so we need to anticipate. It's a very innovative approach, and it will probably have repercussions on other borders with third countries, because we'll try and reproduce it with other third countries. 80% of trade goes through the Hauts-de-France. Then the final challenge is communicating with companies. We've talked about this, and there were lots of imponderables here. We didn't know what the flows of goods would be, and that, of course, is decisive for resources and means. 700 extra customs officers is probably not going to be enough. We'll have to continue to recruit, and we don't know just how many businesses are trading with the UK. Many of them had never done any international trade before, so they weren't in our register, our records. So we tried to work closely with member countries and the Commission to make sure that we could identify all the companies concerned and help them. It wasn't just companies that were not familiar with international trade. There are companies that were familiar with international trade, had traded with third countries, but didn't know about the smart border. Where the formalities are somewhat different, and where everything is based on the idea of doing things upstream, anticipating. So that's what I had to say about the challenges. It's been crazy, a huge project. Well, you know that for yourself. You're a project leader. Many facets. So we've been working on this since 2017. Human resources, as I've said, accounted for a lot, but also real estate, working with the managers of ports and the tunnel. We have worked with temporary accommodation. We've really been very flexible and agile. Facilities, reorganizing offices, people working 24/7. That's really unusual. You have to rethink the way you deploy staff, IT, and a lot of communication at national level, at local level. We had a local project management for there's Jean-Michel as the interregional director for the Hauts-de-France region as well. And this is how we proceeded together with other administrative authorities. Agriculture, for instance, because phytosanitary controls and formalities are very complex. You often react when I say that, but I don't think this affects Airbus. You're empathizing, I guess. You can. I thought maybe Airbus has diversified. I saw an Airbus at Caen, but I didn't see any hens or pigs. Well, we can always provide flowers. And then many external partners, companies, the European Commission and the other member countries. And I'd really like to thank the European Commission and the other member countries. Excellent cooperation. We've always been welcomed when we went out to see them. We went round to communicate on the smart board in particular. Everybody was keen to see how this innovation was going to work. So that's what I had to say. Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Christiane, the Belgian point of view of Brexit. Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Michel. To some extent, the same approach. We had to recruit customs officers, but we encountered the same problem because we'd recruited them and then we couldn't deploy them because Brexit was postponed and we had to find other tasks for them to do. And it was difficult. It really was difficult. Recruitment is really significant, and once you've recruited and it's postponed, you have to find tasks for them to do. Infrastructure and facilities, it was in place already, but we had to upgrade it, modify it, but we didn't have to make huge investments in infrastructure, which was all to the good. Regarding our IT systems, the IT systems were in place. We didn't have to invest hugely for the smart border because we did have these systems and we did stress tests to make sure that they were resilient enough to cope with the extra workload in terms of data flows. Regarding process and procedures, we put a lot of time into this. We worked with the private sector to avoid congestions in logistic nodes. We worked very well with the private sector, I have to say, and it was the private sector that developed software in the ports, Antwerp and Zeebrugge, and we supported them by providing our data, but they did the work, basically. The Belgian customs authorities didn't have to get too involved in that. And in terms of communication, that was probably the major challenge, as Isabelle has said. Communicating to smaller businesses. We had major campaigns. We contacted 20,000 companies. We wrote to them all. We phoned 7,000 companies and had phone conversations with them. And that meant that we got 7,000 EORI numbers granted. We also gave authorizations for loading zones so that the formalities could be conducted at the business itself and not at the ports or the airports. In terms of degree of preparedness, I'm a very happy Director General. I'm pleased with the quality of the work that we've done, not just in Belgium, but also the Commission and the other administrative authorities. Jean-Michel knows this well. We worked closely with France, with Eurostar. We really often called in the French customs authorities to help us, to support us, to avoid congestion. And we did. We avoided bottlenecks thanks to communications, work with the prefect in the north of France. There were worst-case scenarios where everything would collapse. There would be queues right from Zeebrugge to Brussels. And we talked it all through, but it didn't happen. It was really important to have European unity, as Isabelle has said, and it does show that Europe can act united, customs authorities, but Europe as a whole. And that's something that I really appreciated. I found very positive. There are some less positive factors. Sometimes our companies didn't quite know how to approach the whole new paradigm with the UK. They weren't always clear about what they should be doing. That said, we had put in place a structural communication with our colleagues in the United Kingdom so that our colleagues could be better informed, because the information provided wasn't always that clear initially. We haven't seen many offences or people who are not compliant. Fraud, smuggling is continuing despite COVID, despite Brexit. There are illegal cigarette companies working in Belgium. They're factories, real factories. There's 9 of them. It's not like an Airbus factory, but still, they are full-scale factories. 9 of them, and Belgium's only a small country, and the destination is the UK. So criminals are still very well organised. They're continuing to export these illegal goods despite Brexit. We need to remain vigilant. I think that we all agree, and we've seen the same in France. We've seen the same criminal offences with drug, cigarettes, alcohol. Brexit hasn't changed that. The criminal organisations have managed to adapt, and they tend to be able to do that fairly quickly. So basically, positive stock taking. I must say I've worked very closely with the ports, with the shippers, with Eurotunnel, the port authorities. We've worked very closely with them. It's worked out well. We had hundreds of meetings with them, literally hundreds, workshops. So we talked through each of the issues one by one. We did it prior to 1st of January 2021, but also throughout the year, because we continued problem solving throughout the year. Troubleshooting continued. It's minor points now, but still. Frédéric Jacot mentioned the issue of export declarations. Just one example, and an appeal to those who are listening. Instructions given to those who are in charge of your logistics and your customs operations. Make sure that everything is right when you set off for the UK. But a huge amount of work has been done with Eurotunnel, with port authorities. We had to really completely overhaul the infrastructure to avoid having a crisis management plan, which we had prepared. We were ready to apply it, but we didn't have to trigger it at any point in time. And that in and of itself is extremely positive. Perhaps I can appeal once again to the 2 Directors General. We're a year in post-Brexit. There's still issues that need working through at the beginning of 2022. What do you think needs to be done? What's really urgent to supplement everything that was done throughout 2021?
Microphone still working? Yes. So, thank you. You mentioned a number of the cooperative ventures we have. I should mention our British colleagues on the other side of the channel, with whom we are in day-to-day contact on customs formalities. Our former customs attaché has regular contact with his counterparts on the British side to ensure that the crossings are as smooth as possible. Now, we're not here negotiating, we're dealing with purely operational matters, And so there's a strong operational cooperation which has been ongoing with the UK side. Concerning 2022, I mean, things aren't open because aren't over yet because because formalities are being gradually reintroduced in the UK. Now it's been asymmetric so far. Now it's becoming more and more symmetrical. Once more, as to say that the same level of formalities will be on the British side eventually as they are on the European side, and so everything that's been done over 2020-21 needs to continue into 2022 in that sense. Then there needs to be adjustments made in terms of our resources. As I said, we've built an organisation with a number of parameters, but they need to be adjusted throughout 2022. So there's a question of bringing us to a level of organisational stability. We have new 3 offices we mentioned, and they need to be made fit for purpose going forward. There's going to be work in terms of the real estate and in terms of the new flows arriving. Port of Calais is a new port coming on stream, and so there's new things happening all the time, and we have a lively border, basically, an evolving and dynamic one. I hope I've not omitted anything. Well, I could probably spend the next few hours talking about this, but I'd rather hear from you. Our priority remains combating fraud and contraband between Belgium and the UK. One concern we do have is with regard to trade between Belgium and the UK, that we have a slight lack of a framework because things remain under discussion at European level, where we have an exchange of information, but when it comes to prosecuting fraud, it's the framework is somewhat lacking. We also have an issue around Northern Ireland. In particular, goods coming from Ireland via Northern Ireland, that remains is a further question, because in terms of the checks being carried out and in terms of fraud again and smuggling, is that not going to be used as a favoured channel for contraband, depending on how strict and stringent the checks are? Those are the 2 major issues facing the Belgian customs. Indeed, 2021 was, without doubt, was the biggest step up, if you like, for business, but also for customs authorities. So how can we maintain business as usual to the extent that's possible? Bearing in mind this new reality, these new formalities, how can we avoid disrupting border crossings as far as possible? That's a regulatory job, first of all, making sure that everyone carries out the necessary formalities, ensuring that the processes and tools are operational and work properly. So 2021 was very much a year of adjustment, so it was macro level, high level, and then getting more and more detailed as we went through the year. The good news is, as Christian has said, that we can now move on, if you like. We're not just adjusting matters of fine detail anymore. We can look at other things. So we have an external border, with an EU external border we're dealing with, and we have issues to do with the protection of the internal market. And so checks, controls are going to become more and more important as we go forward. That's very much the roadmap, I suppose, for 2022. Even though, of course, checks were very much in place in 2021 already. Frederic, in the light of what you've heard from the 2 Directors General, do you have anything to add? Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Michel. One thing I omitted to mention before, is that the support we've benefited from for the European Commission in the first place and other member states where we have business is something I should thank you for, in particular using our Beluga aeroplanes to carry goods between sometimes our own aerodromes or airports, and so sometimes the safety conditions and so on had to be adjusted. All this had to be maintained in the context of this of Brexit, and so thanks for your support in doing that. Brexit has remained something we are surveying and monitoring within the company, in particular from the point of view of potential regulatory divergence in the future. This is a source of concern across the board, not just in terms of customs. If there is a divergence between the UK and the EU, it's going to be a lot more difficult, more costly for us in terms of formalities in order to maintain our business on both sides of that external border. Okay, I can see there has been a question asked by one of those following us. One for Isabel, first of all, and then one for Christian. Now, we've heard from a company, a very big company, which is well versed in adapting its logistics patterns and carrying out formalities. The question is, how are things for smaller companies? Now, I'm not sure, I don't know how many or what the share is, if you like, and the level of impact on small companies compared to large companies. I wouldn't be able to tell you, but we have provided SMEs with a full range of support and logistics in shape of our offices and so on. Now, clearly, the smaller companies are are faced with more difficulties, particularly those who had never traded abroad before. It's not the kind of thing you learn overnight. They've had to learn how to do this in short order. I feel that that's been a priority that France and the other EU countries have made of this. That is to say, to try and communicate as closely as possible with smaller companies. Some of the people most surprised, if you like, were carriers. Let's just say the drivers first of all, and then their employers. Over time, we've managed to catch up with them, as it were, inform them and convert them, get them to understand what's necessary. When we were looking back over the first year of Brexit, earlier we've said that it's been pretty positive. Let's not forget that the first few weeks were a bit difficult. Now, okay, there weren't miles of tailbacks. Obviously, that was the major fear. No doubt the pandemic actually helped reduce transport flows and therefore reduce tailbacks. But there was a lot of upstream work, and particularly intense outreach work with business. Now, it wasn't completely crazy, but it was pretty intensive. Isabel, you just mentioned the first few weeks of 2021. It's been said already, but I'll say it again because the Director General of DG Taxud is there. Thank you to the Commission for all the work you've done within the G5 that you mentioned in your speech. We harmonised, I believe, quite a lot of things, which were then very useful as of 1st of January when it needed to work straight off the bat. So thank you for your upstream work there. If there wasn't congestion the first few weeks, and I'm not saying there weren't problems in the first few days, there were, but if we didn't have these miles of tailbacks, I remember that it was a Sunday. We had a crisis meeting with some of the people from the Commission to resolve a few teething problems, which risked becoming a lot worse as traffic levels resumed. And so there was a lot of upstream work done by the Commission, a lot of good cooperation, very fruitful between customs authorities, between the countries most affected, of course. And as I say, the Commission was very much on the ball. Now, coming back to business, the subject of SMEs have been mentioned. Now, Mr. Jacot, clearly you're from a large company, but you're a lawyer by training. You're familiar with customs legislation. Now, what advice would you have for SMEs who have not yet traded with the UK but looking to do so? Well, it's hard to give you a clear answer on that, or a specific answer. Support from government agencies is a good start. In whatever country you're based in, that can be a good way of trying to understand what you're dealing with. Study the trade flows, see where the pinch points are. I mentioned Incoterms before. Now, from a contracting point of view, it can be very useful to know who's doing what and who's responsible for what in terms of carrying out customs formalities. don't forget to communicate with your various partners. Sometimes the issue with a freight forwarder or with a carrier, not just with the ultimate end customer who's being supplied with the goods at the end of the day, i.e. the recipient. And then if you're continually confronted with problems, now you can obviously draw on consultants who are able to support you in that context. Now, my advice on this particular subject, it's better to start from a specific case, but essentially that sums up our approach. Every case is different, but I mean, Airbus is a big company, fine. But we've nonetheless, we've tried via GIFAS in France and equivalent associations abroad, we've tried to organise information meetings to, if you like, onboard all our suppliers, however big or small. Even if it's just a tiny company, a micro company which makes one tiny component, we nonetheless want to have them on board so that they know exactly what they have to do, how to contract with forwarders, how to conclude their contracts, how to carry out the formalities, because it's all vital. Thank you. Thank you. Now, looking to two Directors General, where can the information be found as to customs formalities and how they're performed and what's necessary in France or in Belgium? Well, this is a question I'm very used to answering because it's very frequently asked, and you can go on douane.gouv.fr, which is a veritable goldmine of information. There are guidelines and all sorts of manuals on board on the line. There's a lot on about mask wearing and health measures, but there's an awful lot about crossing the border with the UK as well. The website, French Customs website, has an awful lot of information, and then we also have outreach points across France where people simply drop in and get information on their specific case. Christian, well, we have our own website as well. Given our country is a lot smaller, you can simply drop us a line, pick up the phone and call us, and if you don't find what you need on the website, give us a ring. Okay, thank you. I have a question for Muriel Lacoula-Bartre. I'm not sure we have enough distance from the question yet, but have you seen companies reorganising their logistics arrangements, potentially relocating business from the UK to the EU? Well, it's not the kind of thing you see from the macroeconomic indicators, and of course we don't have full data for the latter part of 2021 yet, so of course you need time to collect and analyse that data. Nonetheless, we do know that above and beyond the aggregate level data, every case is different. Different industries are faced with different realities. They have different commercial realities. Nonetheless, it's something we're trying to look at, but it is a little soon to say for the time being. Now, my feeling throughout 2021 was that some companies were wondering whether they shouldn't relocate back to France, particularly the Hauts-de-France region. Now, I'm not sure if that's a trend which will be maintained, but a number of questions and inquiries were made, and a number of initiatives, I think, were made in the Hauts-de-France region in particular. Whether that will actually translate into reality, I don't know, but I think there's the beginning of a trend, shall we say. Well, there's no reason why it shouldn't be confirmed, because we have a new border. It's a significant border, and the north of France is a particularly economically interlinked area. It's linked with, obviously, the Netherlands, with Belgium, with the Île-de-France region of France, i.e. the Greater Paris area. Germany's not far, and then we have a link with the UK as well, with 3 cross-channel links which operate regularly, which are very fast and very effective. So, taken together, a lot of companies are logically asking themselves whether they shouldn't perhaps relocate to the Hauts-de-France, or at least we shouldn't provide them with logistics facilities for storage, warehousing, or indeed support for customs and sanitary formalities across northern France. Now, there are certain lines of business, and this is perhaps not the kind of thing which turns up in the figures yet, but some businesses just don't make sense to keep them in the UK. So e-commerce, for example, if your ultimate recipient of a package is in the EU, there's absolutely no point doing all the customs formalities over in the UK and then do it again when it enters the EU. And so this type of freight flows are starting to relocate, or part of them in any case, are starting to relocate to the continent, specifically the Hauts-de-France. Now, Brexit was always a risk, remains a risk. We've seen that it's not over yet. It's a risk for some, it's an opportunity for others. Christian, I observe that a number of SMEs have stopped trading with the UK. I wonder whether they've done it because of Brexit and extra formalities, possibly, and I wonder as of when they will have to rethink this strategy, whether they will or not. I have personally met with people from SMEs who've said we're going to focus now more on Germany, on France, and we're not interested in the UK anymore. And so I wonder whether they'll rethink that decision at any point in the future and refocus once more on the UK in the future. But I know that a number have stopped trading. Okay, thank you very much. I think that probably is a good moment to conclude this roundtable. Thanks for everyone for your detailed contributions. We're going to have a brief coffee break now. We will resume at 11 for a second roundtable, which will be very business focused. In particular, we'll be looking at how to continue supporting business in Brexit. As we've said many times already, Brexit is not over yet, and there's plenty left to do in supporting business to manage the transition. Thank you all, and see you at 11.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. So we had the first round table, which was highly informative. And I think we felt that restoration of the frontier between the EU and UK was positive, as were formalities on the European side at least. Come back to that. So now I'd like to move on to challenges relating to Brexit that businesses have had to deal with and will continue to have to deal with going forward over the next few months and years. So here in this round table, we'll be talking about various issues. We will address firstly the question of procedures, border procedures, particularly with the UK, because as was said earlier, there are stages to this process on the UK side. And we will talk about the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and try to see whether businesses have benefited from this and how they can perhaps benefit more going forward. And then we'll address businesses and the impact on them, and in particular what they would like to see change, what sort of future prospects we have. For this roundtable, we have three speakers. Let me first introduce Nanette van Schelven, who is Director General of Customs in the Netherlands. Then we have Fernando Pero de Pinink, who is Head of Unit of International General Affairs at DG Taxud at the European Commission. That's Director General for Taxation and Customs Union. But he was also co-lead, and I stress this because it's important in the light of what he's going to say, in negotiating the agreement with the UK concerning customs and origin matters. And then I will give the floor to Nicolette van der Jacht, who is Director General of CLICAT. She'll explain what that is later on, so I won't do that for her now. Let me first ask Nanette, so that we can get into this. And perhaps we'll start by backtracking a little. And I'd like to hear from you how you've been helping operators, traders to get ready for this. Firstly, for the first Brexit, because there are stages to this, as we've said. And have you seen any difference between the preparation of first phase, that's the 1st of January of last year, and second phase, 1st of January of this year?
Thank you, Olivier, and excuse me for answering in English because my French is not so so well that I can speak. I have these answers all in French. So, you started how we asking how we prepared together with traders for the first Brexit on the January 1st. Well, we started back in 2017 already, assessing the impact, of course, from Brexit. And like also my colleagues from France and Isabelle and Christian from Belgium, we all started preparing way back. And from the start, we made it clear that Brexit means customs formalities. And one of the first steps we took was to initiate a dialogue, a close dialogue with the traders, because we knew we could prepare and we knew what kind of impact it would be for the customs organization. But we also knew how big the impact is on the traders. And we heard in the previous session from Airbus how big that impact can be. So we started a close dialogue with trade associations in our trading facilitation committee. And we also started the dialogue with the other relevant government agencies. And together with these trade associations, we started to inform and educate many traders who had no idea of customs and of border formalities, of course. A good example of this cooperation was that we started together the website getreadyforbrexit.eu. And that website mentioned a few clear steps you had to take to be prepared. And of course, everybody knows now, get an AORI number, find someone who will lodge the customs declarations, who do the digital notification, and check digitally that the terminal has all the documents. And that it really came down to activating the whole supply chain. So that's what we did for the 1st of January 21. And I think your question was also, what did you do for the 1st of January 2022?
Yeah, and differences. Enfin, les différences, pardon.
Yes.
Les différences entre 2020.
Exactly, it's the differences between 21 and 22.
I don't know how it is with you, but I had this feeling that that there is this movie where you relive one day over and over again, and it's called Groundhog Day, and that's a little bit what I had when after a year we saw the 1st of January 2022 come up, and I had the feeling of Brexit all over again. And well, I must say that that went very smoothly. Because traders already knew that there were customs formalities. So on that side, they had the advantage of being prepared. I think what was very difficult for traders, that instead of the first Brexit, the formalities on the English side were not very clear. And I must say from this side, a salute to traders, how they prepared in the end with so much uncertainty. And for us, well, of course, we didn't have all the preparations, the big parking lots when there would be a congestion. We didn't have that in place anymore at the 1st of January of this year. And I'm glad that it wasn't necessary. Also, what we did in the coming up of the second Brexit, so to say, the Brexit at the English side, was to stay in close contact with our English colleagues. And not only be in contact with them, but also be in contact with the British traders. We have a trading facility committee, and last year we had several meetings with the Trading Facility Committee on the Dutch side, but also on the UK side. And my British colleague and myself hosted those meetings together. So there was the opportunity for traders in the UK to ask questions at the Dutch customs officers, but also the other way around. And I think building that relationship on an operational level and building a new relationship, I think that really helped.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Now, you're right. You talked about 2017. I would just add to that, you are Customs DG in the Netherlands, so obviously you knew how to get rid of but as for businesses, and that's the other thing I want to say, there was for a long time some confusion, probably through 2019, about whether they would have to make customs declarations again. There was a lot of uncertainty for businesses, and I think it's a statement by Boris Johnson that clarified this. This is what we found with businesses that were waiting to find out what would happen. They thought, no, surely they're not going to leave, really. And if they do, we won't have to make these declarations, because that just can't happen on the ground. I know that's what happened for us. And I mention this because various customs services got ready for this early on, whereas for businesses, private businesses, it was much tougher because we said in the first round table, you invest when you know you need to invest. So let me move on. It wasn't always easy for businesses to manage the various timelines because there were constant postponements on the UK side. Could you remind us of what the stages were, the various milestones in restoring these formalities and the need to comply with UK rules?
Well, it was for a long time very uncertain what the rules would be. There was a deadline, but we didn't know what rules traders had had to apply to. So that was very difficult, and I'm glad that the postponement of some of the deadlines helped to make the traders more ready for this for these formalities. And you should also keep in mind that of course, there is this COVID crisis, that traders don't see just one issue. And they had to, keep their head above the water. And if there's something very uncertain, then you don't put a lot of effort in it, and you wait until it's certain. So, like I said before, it's a major effort on traders, and I really salute for, in the end of the day, what they did and how they prepared.
Thank you. Maybe a question now more that concerns the UK side. How did the British authorities inform businesses, whether they be British or EU, inform them of what was happening, the various stages, the milestones? Could you just give us a rundown on how the communication program went?
Well, like I said, the UK border authorities really did an outreach to all traders within Europe, and they unified with the customs authorities in the various member states, at least in my point of view, with the Dutch customs authority, and made it really a joint effort to make sure that traders would be informed. And like I said, we had a few mutual trading facilitating committee online meetings for traders to be informed and to ask their questions. So I must say the outreach was really okay.
Okay, thank you. Could you also give us a feel for how you sealed the process of going through the UK borders, and how the system that they use now, that we'll talk about a bit later, which is the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, or GVMS, this acronym that everyone knows, how does that work?
Well, how it works precisely, I can't tell you. But I think, the UK left the EU by choice, and the way they designate and design their operating border model is basically their responsibility. And I think my priority with dealing with this border operating model and GVMS is preventing the congestion at our border. Would not have been my choice, because it puts the burden, of course, of validating declarations on the operators in the EU and not on the side of the English. And added to that, once the SPS requirements come into play in July, I think the burden will get heavier for these operators at validating and pre-notifications. I think they're an issue to deal with. Secondly, I think GVMS relies heavily on the hauliers to perform various tasks, like creating the GMR. Most of the time, they are not the party that have all the relevant data, and so they are not used to the customs formalities. So I think, yes, that's having a bit of a problem there.
Merci.
Thank you. With a few weeks hindsight, the GVMS was operational as of the 1st of January 2021 for transit to the UK, but it only really began fully operating for all of customs formalities as of the 1st of January this year. So there's just a few weeks, really. It's been in operation. Can we take stock from the European point of view? How's it working?
Well, like last year with Brexit, January is not a good month to take stock for the rest of the year. But I think it's important that the route from the Netherlands to the UK use both pre-lodgement and temporary storage. And on the positive side, and I heard my colleagues from Belgium and France said that also, we did not face congestions in the Dutch ports. I think a little less than what I heard from Isabel in the first roundtable. But like I said, the volumes of the trade are low, really low. So basically the system works. And most importantly, because trade, like the ferry operators, I think they put a lot of effort in keeping the goods moving. Despite these efforts, in early January, multiple trucks were admitted to board the ferry at their shipment. They could not be validated correctly in GVMS, and data quality is most of the time the issue. And I think this links earlier to what I said, that trade should be prepared. A clear agreement on the responsibilities is needed to make this work. And most importantly, like I said, data quality and connectivity between all the digital systems is a key in making this new border work, both in the UK and in the EU. And in this way, the experiences of the last couple of weeks, they mirror what we experienced last year. And what we see is improvement from the first week in January to where we are up now. I asked yesterday for the ferry terminals what their experience are, and they say, well, you see that there were teething problems at the beginning, but it's getting better and better. So it's hopeful for the rest of the year.
Merci. Alors...
Well, thank you. Let's look now a bit to the future. Have measures been taken to support economic activity for companies, for instance, last year, that might be continued or relaunched at European level or national level, so really to boost economic activity for companies?
Well, first of all, we have to come to terms with reality that there's a border, and that means friction for trade. I think what we are investing in is the cooperation with UK government and with the EU, and of course not only government, also trade associations, to make this border work and to work as smoothly as possible. But there is a border, but solving unnecessary problems needs to be business-driven. I think trade can identify the real problem, and we saw that last year, the beginning of Brexit, when we had those bilateral meetings, not only with the customs agencies, but also with the traders' representatives. They came up with the real problems that we could solve. So I think this should be business-driven. And for that reason, I think it's important that all the participants who are listening now share their possible problems with their associations, because we as customs organization really listening to what they say, and that way we can solve together and make this border work. I think that would be our main goal for the upcoming years.
Merci.
Thank you, Nanette. Thank you very much. I can confirm that in France also, as was said earlier on this morning, the French customs authorities are in close contact with traders. There have been lots of Brexit conferences that have been organised, especially to the north of France. And it really was a partnership. The idea was to inform, but also get feedback from companies. And I remember discussions around these conferences. There were businesses that were panicking, that were very alarmed about their future. If 75% of their business is with the UK, then of course you're worried. So this support was really important in France as well, with the Director General of Customs and Businesses. Let's move on perhaps to the second topic, if you will, of this round table, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And here I'm turning to Fernando. Gradually, there's been the reintroduction of formalities, totally on the European side, gradually on the UK side. with postponements, but it will come about, of course. And if we want to maintain a level of trade and business activity on both sides of the Channel, European but also UK, this agreement was reached, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And we need to discuss it, I think. To what extent does the TCA facilitate trade? Thank you. Thank you, Olivier. I'd first of all like to say a few words about the framework of this agreement and then look at some of the issues relating to the potential of the agreement and explain what it can do, what it can't do. So first of all, the sort of background. Let me remind you of the slide that Mr. Barnier published. Here it is, I'm holding it up. You can see the European Union, then the European Economic Space area, which is integrated in the internal market, but not the customs union. And then you have the agreement with Switzerland, which is semi-internal market. Then you have association agreements with partner countries in particular. Those are the Eastern Partnership, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, where you have alignment with customs agreements. So we've got the customs union with Turkey, which is completely separate and different. In theory, it should imply considerable degree of integration, but in practice, rather less so. And then, right at the end, you have the free trade agreement with Asia, Japan, and so on, the last generation agreements. And then the last thing would be no agreement, WTO, which we've avoided. But the case of the UK, we're closer to conventional trading agreements. In customs terms, nothing changes. Customs formalities apply fully. Customs declaration, VAT declaration, declaration of entry, of exit, application of restrictions and prohibitions, 100%. And then there's another additional document to benefit from preferences. You have to have proof of origin. Under the agreement, this is a little bit more flexible because there's a system of declaration by the exporter. Customs and trade facilitation is a whole chapter. It's a fairly standard chapter based on other agreements, although there are some differences. First of all, what's foreseen is mutual recognition of approved economic operators. That was already established, and the UK has stayed in Common Transit Agreement and the Agreement on Simplification of Customs Formalities, those two conventions. And then we have a chapter on customs cooperation, which has a lot of potential, actually, and could be extended to a lot of activities. In some areas, we go a step further than has been done with other countries. Now we've got an ambitious protocol for cooperation regarding VAT and collection of tax debt. So what we've got is something that's similar to other agreements, but it's got some potential that needs perhaps to be further clarified. To what extent does this agreement help to facilitate trade? That was your question. Well, it's an agreement that is specific. We didn't negotiate the elimination of barriers, but to see what barriers were going to be reintroduced. It's different from other agreements where you try and remove barriers. Here we're putting some in place. So facilitation is somewhat limited to the mutual recognition of approved economic operators and possible future forms of cooperation. For instance, in the area of exchange of information, particularly it could even be information about exports and imports so that you could match the two. And we could consider better cooperation when it comes to risk assessment, for instance, so as to have more fluidity of trade. So there's some potential. Unfortunately, the UK does not want to give the impression that it's aligned on to the EU, and that's why it wasn't possible to remove the demand of summary declaration in security terms of imports, because that would have implied an alignment. So there are limits, and it depends to a large extent on what the UK is prepared or not prepared to do. For roll-on, roll-off, there is potential. It remains to be developed. The UK was applying its own system of anticipated declarations. These are compulsory, and this is managed as best we can. So what possible developments are there? There's Article 103 that lists a whole series of possible measures for the future. That also includes the habilitation, the approval of a committee that could adopt concrete measures. So you could say the sky's the limit. You could take this much, much further in terms of simplification. But of course, it all depends on the overall situation and state of play of relations with the UK. Simplification measures need to be politically endorsed. And the framework isn't just the free trade agreement or trade and cooperation agreement with the UK, but it goes much further than that and implies compliance with other commitments, withdrawal agreement, and also other matters. If considering possible simplification measures, we have to take into account our own systems, our IT systems. So before considering measures that are outside the framework, we need to make sure that there is consistency and integrity of our own systems. For instance, if we were to consider a new information exchange system, then this would have to be worked out within the frame of a broader framework within the European Union and with neighbouring countries, rather than having something specific tailored to the UK. And of course, I'm repeating myself here, but bearing in mind that the integrity of the European system must be complied with. Experience with Switzerland or with Norway, for instance, has shown that facilitation measures generally require some degree of alignment with the European rules. Are European companies benefiting from the TCA? And are they using it? According to our statistics, the answer is yes. But I would qualify that. The latest data on tracking this that we have from Tax UDA DG indicate that European exporters in 2021 from January to November increased their sales by 18% as compared to 2020 on average. But exports from the UK to the EU have fallen by 27%. There are a whole range of factors that may explain these data. First of all, the methodology that's used, because the 2020 data are data referring, well, that were collected on the basis of the internal market methodology and not external trade. And there's another factor that may explain this. the UK was not applying controls on imports in 2020-2021. They had a system of delayed declarations, whereas the other way around, that wasn't the case. We're following very closely trade statistics. Obviously, we will be doing this very carefully throughout 2022. So far, trade seems to be pretty fluid over the first days and months in January. But we're moving from a preparatory phase, as indicated in the previous roundtable, to a control phase. And we're not entirely sure exactly how the UK will carry out these controls. There are still some uncertainties, in particular regarding sanitary and phytosanitary controls that are still being introduced gradually. As of the 1st of July, summary import declarations for reasons of security and safety are going to be introduced on British imports. Now, regarding the use of preferences, our data show that for imports into the EU, the preference system is used to a great extent, 82% of the total, but we don't know to what extent they're used for exports to the UK as yet. How have the Commission and the customs authorities helped to facilitate trade? We've worked very closely, an excellent cooperation. That's really exemplary. And we've published a lot of information. Just to look at the website, all you need to do is Google Taxud Brexit, and you'll find a very detailed series of publications, a whole page, the guidebook lines that we've published, answers to questions. We've got 110 FAQs, for instance, measures for clarifying the application of certain aspects of rules of origin, supplier declarations, for instance. And we've been working closely with the UK as well, of course, in order to facilitate uniform application of the rules. For insufficient operations, for instance, we have very frequent and smooth contacts with our partners in the UK. We've even got a complaint system that you can see on the website that's managed by Taxud and DG Trade. And we're very open to any questions asked by traders, and we're there to help them solve those problems. I think on the whole it's going pretty smoothly, and there's no reason to think that there would be major problems ahead. And your last question, are there good practices that emerge from the negotiations? Well, I would tend to say that it's rather hard to consider as good practice an agreement that we would never want to negotiate with anybody for very obvious reasons. But what counts the most, I think, and this has been underscored by previous speakers, is the cohesion at European level, very close cooperation amongst member states, the authorities, the customs authorities. And we've worked in an atmosphere of trust and mutual support. And perhaps that's the most significant lesson to be learned from all this.
Thank you, Fernando. I have noted that things might change in the future. We'll come back to that later. So having heard about the restoration of border formalities on the British side as well now, increasingly, plus the Trading Cooperation Agreement, I'd like now to pass over to Nicolette, who will be speaking on behalf of business. European businesses, and specifically Nicolette is the Director General of CLICAT. I'd like to ask you, first of all, if you'd like to say a few words of introduction about CLICAT. Thank you, Olivier. First of all, I'd like to thank the Director General of the French Customs for inviting CLICAT to speak today. We are an association representing the European logistics firms. I'd like to congratulate you on this inaugural major conference on the subject of Brexit. I think it's very important to talk about that at European level and at the level of the Council as well.
To now continue in English, which is sort of our working language. We're based in Brussels as a European association, like many others. I think maybe what makes CLICAT a little bit different is that we sort of get involved in all modes of transport. Freight forwarders, they need to use, they're flexible, they need to use different modes of transport. We, of course, also represent customs agents through our membership. Membership is actually National Association of Freight Forwarders and Customs Agents. So I think our role is quite wide, quite horizontal. We also deal with sort of digital issues. We're part of the larger projects on digitalization, also of transport information. We don't talk any longer of transport documents in Europe. It's now the exchange of information. It's a big challenge. Also, of course, all the security-related issues, the issues related to Fit for 55. So I think we have quite a lot on our plate. And this at COVID times. Of course, I think this is another challenge, I think, which our sector has been put to test over the last 2 years. The COVID pandemic has been testing a lot of the resilience of supply chains, of global logistics chains. Of course, our members, they operate, many of them, within the EU, within an internal market, but the majority of them, that's why many of the traders, they use customs agents because they have the knowledge, they provide the support. And over the last 2 years, we've seen these profound disruptions, not only on the, of course, the pandemic, but what does that mean? It means also the time pressure on services. We continue to see huge delays, access to capacity for maritime, but also for aviation. So, the sector has always been able to find solutions. Also during the times where we see in Europe, we've seen border closures. That also brings, I think, the importance of the logistics sector again to the floor, because sometimes when everything is fluid and everything works, it's fine, it's taken for granted. And I think the last 2 years, also Brexit, has demonstrated the importance of logistics and also the importance of an internal market. So there have been many challenges there. Our role has not only been to inform our members and to support them during all the time of transitions. We have, of course, we heard from Nanette also the important milestones, the major preparedness aspects and the challenges. Our members have long been kept in the dark on sort of the needed in particular. We've always been calling for predictability and security and sort of, it's true that indeed we had to explain even a lot of traders whether there's a deal or no deal. Of course, it doesn't really matter. There will always be sort of those border obligations that will apply. Of course, also capacity issues, not only, I think, for the administration, but also for the intermediary sector. Many companies had to take on board new resources, new stuff, people with the necessary knowledge, which customs is not something that you learn in 6 months. It's something you know that better than I, Olivier, with your background. It's something that really needs a lot of knowledge on the IT systems, not only on the legislation, on the sort of the frameworks, but it's a whole different sort of areas of knowledge. And then we still have the differences in local measures and procedures, readiness of IT infrastructures. So it's been a big thing. Then we've been, over the last 2 years, particularly been involved in outreach and cooperation with the national customs authorities. We've had many meetings where we invited the customs authorities to explain how the national border operation measures would be working. The Netherlands, of course, has been a great example. with the port base and the great cooperation between the public and the private sectors. Then, of course, with the European Commission, European Parliament, we've been involved with the Intermediates Task Force. Had discussed practical arrangement for facilitation, capacity-related issues. Now, today, of course, we also have to look at the future. I think we are quite honored to be also on board of the Domestic Advisory Group, the DAC, under the TCA, and that's an independent advising committee on the implementation of the agreement. So today we work with other trade associations in a transport subgroup on what we think is really a priority. Because as Fernando said, there are a lot of different paragraphs, also on customs. There's a lot of scope for within the agreement already, but now it's about how do we implement it, what's the priority, what comes first, and I think this is a very important element for the work. Yeah.
Merci, Nicolette.
Thank you, Nicolette. Perhaps you could say a bit more about the major issues in terms of customs which European companies are still facing in trading with the UK.
Oui. Oui, bien sûr. Sorry.
You can say it in French.
No, thank you. So this is indeed sort of the second year. So again, January, as Nanette said, is sort of a difficult time. But indeed, we have not seen, as some of the media, sort of we didn't never see the lineup of queues of the trucks at the border. So that's a good thing. Of course, it's a learning curve, and there have been, certainly in the beginning of the month, been issues. I think overall it's fair to say that if we reflect on the readiness of the supply chains, it seems that there's been a lack of preparedness of the hauliers and small traders on the new formalities and procedures. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, it's been good probably in reality. There's been the phase-in, subsequently the phasing in by means of the 3 subsequent delays. We're not so sure whether it would have been ideal to have it a swift and a more effective implementation of the agreement. Because again, that would have given more certainty and predictability. I think we also need to recognize that extra time was not always wisely used. That's maybe human. If you have more time, you delay it. That's something probably everybody would do. But the reality is that there even today, there are companies that still have to get to grips with even the 1st of January 2021. That's reality. I think also it's fair to say that the HMRC has been very helpful. I think we need to comment on the constructive engagement with UK HMRC to support the readiness. Still, of course, at the beginning of the year, there have been technical and IT issues, in particular concerning the GVMS. There have been some sort of connectivity issues, the interconnections between Chief and the IPEFs, as well as the GVMS webpage transparency and the updates. It was a bit unfortunately that this was just published. The border guide became public. I think it was the day before Christmas.
I think it was 22nd.
22nd, okay. Two days before Christmas.
Le 22.
Okay.
Alors, il est vrai, pour abonder dans le sens de...
Yeah, just to chip in there, it's true that for business, we've got used to this to some extent. I mean, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was published on the 24th of December 2020, so we were assuming that we would learn about have a British announcement on the formalities on the 24th of December 2021. In the end, it was 2022, so nice surprise. But 22nd of December, joking aside, is very late in the day for business to adjust. Most people are already off on their Christmas holidays, and the details of formalities are coming out so that, on how GVMS would work in practice, which is a genuine issue and still is for business.
Je pense aussi, oh, sorry. I think there were also some IT and some port-related infrastructure issues. Maybe more importantly for members is also the issues related to the SPS and the new pre-notification requirements for import into the GB. I think more specifically there are unclarities related to the specific project subject to those requirements. And so there what we really are missing is a clear sort of list of the products that are involved, that are necessary to provide the pre-notification. There I look at the European Commission. Maybe there's something can be done there. I appreciate that maybe you're then looking again at the UK, because there are different sort of legislative frameworks that still applies. But for industry and for the sector, it's something that is missing, and that sort of remains really pertinent to avoid further blockages. The other maybe important challenge that remains is the experiences with claiming returned goods relief for goods returning from the UK. Since the end of the transition period, there have been many cases where duties had to be paid on those goods simply because the procedures associated with claiming returned goods due to relief were basically too burdensome and not practically feasible. So that the return goods relief is an issue, HS codes, and I think the other issues like more IT related, I think there we see things will continue to improve, and it's basically a learning curve, I think, for both the public and the private side.
Donc, pas mal de problématiques.
So quite a few issues all the same that you've identified there. We can see that some are still outstanding and not yet resolved. I'll be coming back to Fernando on that in a minute. What about businesses' expectations? Are they making specific expectations of customs formalities? Anything specific?
Oui, je pense que la réalité... Oh, sorry. It's really confusing. Of course, we're dealing with an UCC, so the UCC is there, it's being evaluated. I think that's also something that within CLECAT we're very involved in, evaluation and sort of, it provides a very ambitious framework at UCC, and there's more scope for simple customs formalities and procedures overall. I think the reality is that the harmonized application at national level in practice remains difficult in some cases. So I think that there indeed, and that's not really, again, related to Brexit, there's a need to new and enhanced simplifications. So yeah, we continue to make some of particular member states more aware. What are the possibilities provided? And there, of course, there's also tends to be then different sort of differences in implementation. So we, again, that's something that industry always calls for, a harmonization of implementation. Easiness of rules and procedures. Then maybe, again, as I said, the swift and effective implementation of the TCA is crucial. In particular, there's some important elements in the chapter on customs and trade facilitation. There is the, I think in particular important for trade is the authorized economic operator status. There, and as well as the commitments on cooperation towards the roll-on, roll-off, the establishing of a single window environment. I think in particular for AEO, there's more scope, because it's sort of, for industry and for business, you have to be an AEO. It's sort of a cost-benefit analysis. So if you invest a lot in it, you also want to get the benefits out of it. And there sometimes we are a little bit disappointed in terms of the simplification and the facilitation that it provides. So even there, if there is that element of mutual recognition, I think there's a lot of to be learned and to be further worked out more in detail.
Alors je pense que Fernando.
Thank you. I think Fernando's pretty much filled an entire notebook there, I think, with points to take forward. Are there other additional sort of supplementary things that you can imagine being done at European level in order to meet the full range of business expectations we've mentioned?
So yeah, again, I think the single window for customs should be treated as a priority. Today, what we often see is that at border authority often work in silos. They use underlying systems and processes. So I think there's a need, in particular, when it comes to Brexit, where there's a lot of agencies involved. We have the DEFRA agency, we have border customs. So there's this element of the bridges between the different agencies. That's extremely important. Again, because the more complex regulatory setting generates more complex and burdensome administrative burden, basically for business. Yeah. Maybe you can yourself maybe compliment. Am I missing something in terms of?
No. Merci, Nicolette.
Thank you, Nicolette. Well, there's an awful lot of detail, but there's a lot of things as well which will make companies' lives easier, particular EU exporters, when the UK has a clarified number of points, because their system remains imperfect. Now, it's perhaps it's not surprising, perhaps, because the restoration of border controls has been very staggered. But you mentioned there are SPS checks, for example, being reintroduced, and they're not sure exactly when will be what will be happening, and what stage are we at in terms of as a business. Is my product need to be pre-identified as of 1st of January? Okay, yes. Do I need an export certificate and a health check as of 1st of July? If so, I need to know that straight away, because if I want to have that certificate as of the 1st of July, I need to find a vet. And I know that on the British side, they've already deferred some of these deadlines back to September, October, and so on. I think dairy products has been put back to September, for example. So there are a whole number of things which have been put back, postponed. Looking now to Fernando, in terms of some of the questions raised by Nicolette, I know there were plenty of them, a great long list, in fact. Nicolette mentioned the access database, the Commission. Of course, a European exporter's dream would be for all information, as we have for trade with other areas of the world, other countries, that all information be available in a single database. But for the time being, the data is not available, neither on the UK side nor at the European side. Now, I know it's complex, but can the Commission not perhaps help business here and try and provide them with that information, a one-stop shop for it? Thank you very much, and thanks, Nicolette, for the question. And indeed, I'm going to try and answer one of the questions that's been asked in the chat as well, as to the additional facilitation measures we might think about taking. Before designing such measures, what you need is a stable framework. You need to be operating in a stable framework, and you need experience. For the time being, we don't have a stable framework on the UK side. We have an evolving framework, shall we say, and we have a number of uncertainties. And in terms of practice, experience, it's been sporadic. It's patchy, and we don't think it puts us in a position to weigh up what the best simplification measures would be at this stage. I think we need to wait for the situation to stabilise. That'll probably be towards the end of the year, when the last stage of the processes enter into force as of mid-November, I think, for SPS checks in particular. As of then, we can perhaps look together, that's to say, collectively with the rest of the member states and all the economic operators, to via the Trade Contact Group, in order to weigh up and appraise the situation. So, once we've done that, I think then we can perhaps try and take some more targeted action. And indeed, there is an authorization clause. Now, I said the sky's the limit. Maybe that was going slightly far, too far. There is obviously a limit because we do need a legal basis, and obviously this legal basis will not allow the single market to be jeopardised in any way. Nonetheless, an exchange of information needs to be promoted in order to try and streamline processes, streamline information sharing, such that one of the questions raised during the previous roundtable can be addressed. That is to say, combating fraud, combating contraband. We know all those aspects there. There will be potential cooperation. So I think there are other things as well we could bear in mind. We could look at the single window idea. Now, is it going to be possible to harmonise IT systems? I don't know. That's an open question, and I think it requires greater thought.
Also, we have to realise that we're going to need a broader policy with neighbouring countries, so that we don't have something that's too specific or ad hoc per country, even though sometimes it's inevitable. And also there's the fact that we need to think about quotas and customs unions. We've got the group of wise men for that, and we need to think about that so that we don't get involved in an interaction with the UK that might be prejudicial to the EU. Okay. Thank you. There's something that's been touched on here that is connected. It's true that there's some confusion and we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with this relationship. But businesses have been asking one question from them, is that let's say between 31st of December 2020 and 1st of January 2021, so that suddenly we had to have SPS declaration on the 1st of January. I mean, that's already been done to get into Europe. But one of the main problems in 1st of July of this year is that in addition to GVMS, or unless they change the rule, we're going to have to add an extra declaration GVMS, otherwise we won't be able to get through. So isn't there room for talks about sanitary and phytosanitary measures? Because what will be the difference between before and after? Surely it's not more dangerous overnight. Well, in order to eliminate this sort of declaration, the countries concerned have to be in a single integrated safe zone or area. And obviously, this means that the same rules have to be applied by all the countries in the zone. And this is why, with Norway and Switzerland, these security procedures have been designed, and that is supposed to be included in the import control system too. And the UK has to be ready and willing to do the same thing as the Swiss and the Norwegians. We can't apply measures aimed at simplification if that means we lower the requirements on other partners, and they know this full well. It's their choice, and all this will depend on what your partners in the UK tell their political authorities, and to what extent the politicians think this is important when it comes to negotiations. But there's no quick solution to that. Okay, in the chat, we've got some questions coming in. Firstly, for Fernando, the trade agreements, in particular concerning preferential, don't concern China, even if the company is headquartered in France. Is that right? Okay. Well, you have to distinguish the customs status of a product. So a product from China is perhaps freely circulating in the EU, which means there's an EU status. But then there's the question of the origin, which requires a sufficient degree of transformational processing that is set out in the rules of origin per product, and that will always be considered as a third country product. And therefore, we won't, the European exporter will not be able to say that the origin is the EU. Unfortunately, those are the rules that are applicable in all free trade agreements. And of course, as we remember, we're not in a customs union with the UK. So before I go to the next question, let me make one small point that has exercised many businesses since October. The British have changed the import system and now require their customs representatives to register the country of origin in the declaration. I see you smiling about that, but they can't put EU in. It's the country. And yet for us, the EU is still the right reference, and this led to quite some furore. I don't know whether the Commission has looked at this. Yes, of course. And our colleagues in France have reported this as well. And CLICAT also. And that was on the 22nd of December. The UK told us rather surprisingly, look, we're going to change the codes for the countries of origin. EU will disappear as a code. It'll be member state. So you say, what does that mean? Surely it's an origin of member states. And we wrote to them on 31st of December saying, forget it. Don't even think about it. And this was made clearer later. There are 3 different codes, actually. There's the shipping country code, which might be member state. There's a non-preferential country of origin, which might be a member state. But the preferential country of origin cannot be an EU member state because under the agreement, this can't exist. So they would be asking for something that doesn't exist. Now, they are keeping the EU code, but it's being replaced because we're using digital ones. It's 1107 or 73, I can't remember. You'll find it on our website. So we feel the problem has been solved, and thank you for mentioning that. Okay, thank you, Fernando. I have another one for Fernando in the chat. What is the state of the relationship between EU customs services and the UK ones, given the way GVMS has changed over the past year? And is there some permanently open channel of dialogue between the two aimed at addressing the problems? I mean, we've just mentioned one of the potential problems. Yes. We have a dedicated customs trade commission that meets at least once a year. But this is the formal body. But obviously, we also have a very regular and good contacts with our partners in the Treasury and HMRC. And whenever there are problems, we're in touch with them. And we all set up a remote meeting, a video conference or whatever. And these issues are addressed, and it all runs pretty smoothly. There are a lot of things they've replied to. They're very cooperative. Obviously, there's a political atmosphere they're not responsible for, but as a customs administration, there are people there who are able and competent and open, and I think we can be pleased with that. I'm sure member states have the same experience. Yes, this was mentioned in the first roundtable, and I can confirm that in terms of businesses, we have always been included in the UK processes, and they take on board our comments because we can always flag problems in. No, Fernando seems to be very successful because there's another question for him. So businesses and customs officials are involved in this process, but do you think that member states can enhance information available here? Thank you for the question. But it's also something for national customs business. Then we'll put the question to Nanette. I would say we don't have specific programs for this. We have training courses involving member states' customs authorities, but obviously we've needed a special program for this. And the main question is not about imports into the EU, because we're used to that. I think the problem is more about exports to the UK. And it's the British, therefore, who have to settle all the customs issues there. There's a question of Incoterms that's been mentioned, and it's true that this is something that is being addressed. Okay, when it comes to training, it's not just about the people who have to declare. There are other people in businesses who are involved because Incoterms is something that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. So, name question for Nanette. In the Netherlands, for example, what has been done in terms of training? I know you talked about getting ready in 2017, so you must have done something. Were there things from the past you can tell us about? Do you still have training courses ongoing to support people who have to declare?
Well, thank you. I know the problem. But first of all, let me say there is an obligation for the customs agencies and there's an obligation for the business. And as we heard throughout this whole morning, the customs field is a very technical field. So I can understand that not every business is able to do their own declaration and they need intermediates. And that's the way the whole supply chain works. We, at this moment, have a hard time finding good people. Isabel has hired a lot of people, Christian hired a lot of people, and we did the same thing. So finding good people for our own agency is a task for us. In the intermediate field, I see that customs declaration, people who have that knowledge in the private sector are very hard to find. It's not something we can fix as and I don't think that's our task as a customs agency, but what we try to do is work closely together with the trade companies and with all the intermediates. In the customs world, not only the people who work at the public side, but also in the private sector know each other. It's like this big family. It's like that in the Netherlands, but I think that's on the international level as well. So we help each other with education, with, for instance, also we have lots of mailboxes. You can put your question in when you have a question regarding, for instance, origin. We have help desks, we have business contact points, but we don't make the declaration for the business. And I think that is where the need is for businesses, especially small businesses. I know the problem is in the Netherlands. I think it's a problem within the whole of Europe because it's such a particular knowledge and like I said, it's very technical. So short answer, we help each other, but we don't take over the declaration.
Thank you very much, Nanette. So question of costs is coming up now, and Sven Nicolette. In CLICAT and similar European federations, has anything been done? And how do you see the need for declarations, the need to train people to do them?
well, I think indeed that there's a role for our own association. They do a lot of work themselves, but I think what we also notified is that the outreach to EU industry was very much towards intermediary, and the reliance was that they would then again inform the SMEs and the other traders. And that's something maybe that we expected a little bit more, also direct communication to the shippers themselves. Maybe some more targeted approaches there. Yeah, we will continue to do so. Of course, also at sort of European level, there's a lot of communication with other associations. We continue to have our own members that we provide with the information. So it's always this sort of, the stage sort of approach, because of course there's so many traders in Europe.
So, Fernando, would you like to take that one as well? Yes, let me just clarify a detail. The role of the Commission, of course, is to supply the information, facilitate communication information. And I refer you to the website again, because there are links to the websites of all member states with lots and lots of available information. So that's the first step. And then, of course, it's up to the private sector to take over. Okay. I think that's it for questions, but I want to say something about training to include, because in businesses there have been problems. We've talked a lot about confusion and uncertainty, which hasn't helped communication of information, because businesses that invested in training from the beginning, as you did at States, but you know, different kind of business we're talking about between governments and businesses. So people like to get immediate return on investments, and those businesses that got involved early on spent money, invested early, maybe not for nothing, but the thing was then things were postponed, and then it came back more than once. Made it very difficult to train people and be ready for the go live. So the situation is what it is, as I'm sure you know, but Nicolas, you didn't say there was a meeting in 2019 in Brussels where the issue at stake was training and the need for knowledge, and associations identified the problem, and people realized it was going to be difficult to deal with this because you have to budget for the future, but making a budget for something that might never happen in the future is a problem. So I think we'll wind up there with our round table. Let me thank you, Annette, Fernando and Nicolette, for your contributions. Very useful input. We'll have a quick jingle, I think, for a few minutes, then I'll hand over to the Director General, who will join us here. Thank you all. We'll be back in just a few seconds.
Well, we're coming to the end of the seminar. We're reaching the conclusions, and to do that, I shall give the floor to Mr. Bert Lange, who's a European MEP. He is speaking remotely because he has been unable to attend because of other commitments professionally. I will give him the floor.
Thanks a lot for the invitation to give some conclusion for this really interesting seminar. Thanks a lot to the French presidency for organizing this seminar. It gives a lot of fruitful information, and also for me as chair of the International Trade Committee and co-chair of the UK coordination group inside the European Parliament, new aspects for our further work. So let me make some remarks in principle. Let's see, 3 of them. During the discussion on the 2 rounds, I see some obstacles in the round, and we discussed them. And it seems to me clear that Brexit is a quite unique process, and there is no blueprint for that. And this has to be in our mind as well. So some obstacles are really created because the United Kingdom has a specific wish to go forward. And this was not the wish of the European Union. And secondly, Fernando presented the picture from our chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, with this ladder of different options for getting together after the Brexit. And it's totally clear that there would be some better option than the situation we are faced with now. But of course, on the other side, there has be also the possibility for a situation even worse. Some of the hardliners in the United Kingdom were really looking for a situation where the United Kingdom would have been a really normal third country without closer links to the European Union. So therefore, the situation as it is, the wish to have a trade agreement, a comprehensive trade agreement from the UK side was the starting point of the negotiation with a lot of patience. And I'm really grateful to Michel Barnier that he showed such a really amount of patience in the negotiation. I remember quite well the 24th of December in 2020, 4 o'clock, when the negotiations really ended. And we had then Christmas time and the time between Christmas and January to discuss this in the Parliament, how to proceed with the agreement with the TCA in the Parliament. So that's the basis for our work. And related to the TCA, the third remark at the beginning, the process is an ongoing process. After Brexit, it's before Brexit, because in the TCA we have a lot of elements which have to be negotiated and concluded during a reasonable time frame. And the question of SPS was raised several times in the discussion before. So in conclusion, some remarks. Of course, the re-establishment of borders between EU and the UK has an impact on trade, no doubt about. And the pure economic numbers make this really clear. We had a decrease, and this was mentioned in the first round as well, of around about 35% from the exports to from the European Union to the UK, and in the other side we have a decrease from around 16%. So for Germany, the situation is even a little bit worse. We had a partnership with the UK in a quite intensive manner on trade. UK was on the 5th place of the main trading partner with Germany, and now it's on the 10th place. So a clear decrease in trades. But on the other hand, the impact of the fluidity of trade is well managed. And I guess that's really good news. So that the EU side and the customs administration has been really well prepared. And this was also, I guess, one of the results of today's discussion, that a lot of work has been done in several member states and the European Commission to be really well prepared, even knowing that the TCA was really finished only a few days before the provisional application of the agreement took place. And I'm really deeply impressed about the innovative solutions, for example, the smart border solution in the region of Hauts-de-France, where around about 80% of the flows between the United Kingdom and continental Europe pass through. So the customs administration guarantee the effectiveness of controls as an external borders of the European Union, and this is quite unique in history. That doesn't mean that we have no friction at all. No doubt about. One example I dealt with was a small company in Germany importing tubes from UK for a long time, and then the surprise was quite evident that because of the missing of the URI number, the import was not possible anymore. So they had to require the number and so on and so on. So that led me also to a point which was also mentioned in the second round, the question of information. So we need really keep our forces into information, specifically for small and medium-sized enterprises. Fernando mentioned the website of the Commission. I guess the European Union has a duty, member states have a duty, but also trade associations have a duty to get all the information available to the companies. The quite positive assessment of the restoration of the customs formalities with the EU is really an important key to the success in the cooperation within Europe. And this is really great. Often I heard criticism to the European Union because the member states' interests are really the main situation inside European Union. I guess the cooperation custom within Europe is really a big factor for the success in the border crossing custom administration, also towards European companies, and they really worked hard hand in hand to establish proper formalities. And this is a really good signal for working together inside the European Union. Goods from EU entering in the UK is faced with various problems. Nicolette mentioned a lot of them, so various delays from the UK side and some technical problems, the IT issues, and the IT platform, also the question of SPS requirements for the import to the United Kingdom. We are discussing this continuously with the counterparts in the United Kingdom, and I think in total things are really constantly improving, even knowing that, of course, also on the British side, the administration has to be built up, new staff have to be required, and so on and so on. So it's also not easy for the UK side, but I guess the process is now going on. And these problems with the UK side, I heard also from the German Chamber of Commerce, their partner companies in the UK mentioned that the customs authorities in the UK have to build up their own additional custom expertise, new staff. There are only few customs offices connected to the electronic transit system, the NCTS. This, of course, leads to additional costs for the companies. So there we have really to discuss with the UK side to improve this in a really partnership mood, and I'm quite convinced that this will really lead to a good end. The gradual restoration of the British formalities and controls is really one of the main challenges, perhaps the first challenge we have to overcome. We have do it for the European business. We have also to explore and work on the facilities and efforts of the trade and cooperation agreement with the UK. And Fernando mentioned the different steps we are talking with the UK side. We know the agreement contains several important elements, this has been mentioned, which also refer to key international custom agreements and promotes cooperation on custom issue on the international level and the use of international standard. The reinforcement of customs cooperation between the parties is crucial to guarantee a appropriate level of compatibility to customs legislation and procedures and to ensure the promotion of trade facilitation. So we are really looking also to the global perspective on that. So important for trade is, of course, the multilateral recognition of the authorized economic operator status, as well as the commitments on cooperation towards simplifying roll-on, roll-off traffic and establish a single window environment. So this is the second big issue we have to work on Commission side, but also inside the European Parliament and in our contact to the UK side. I agree when it comes to the new UK economic partnership, a swift and effective implementation of the TCA is crucial to provide the necessary certainty and predictability and allow industry to reap the benefits of the New Deal. And therefore, some further improvements are also quite interesting, and the proposals from Nicolette on the one-stop issue and the different other items she proposed. I take notice of that, and we will try to go in this direction, because we need really a practical, pragmatic, and business-driven solution. Even if it's not part of our conference today, but at the beginning it was mentioned, the question of the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, because it had also an impact to the customs procedure in general. As you know, we had really problems with the proper implementation of the protocol with the UK side. We have some grace periods regarding the custom procedures in Northern Ireland, and we are quite generous in this question. But of course, there is the risk that we create a loophole on the trade relations between United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, compared to all the formalities we discussed today. And this can't be the case. This is a question of the integrity of the European internal market, and also regarding the correct implementation of our custom regime. And therefore, we are really in a tough negotiation situation with the government in Downing Street 10. And I hope seriously that we can solve some of the outstanding issues quite soon. So Marius Sefcovic, as our negotiator with the UK side, made in September some really important practical proposals on the control, of course, the reduce some necessities and on the labeling of products. This is only part of the problems we have regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol, but I hope that we can really focus on this part so that the custom procedure for Northern Ireland will be enforced in a proper way, which has also really fruitful link to the general custom procedures we have. We will have at the end of February a joint committee with the UK side. Probably we will manage to get a solution for that so that we can have a proper procedure also on this front. I guess the practical solution, and this is perhaps also a consequence of today, is the crucial one. We learned that flexibility and room for maneuver is really crucial. And at the end of the day, we should really try to find practical solution and in good faith also with the UK side. And we heard today also some examples where this good faith with UK side was also a practical issue. So thank you for your attention. Thank you again for this really interesting and constructive and really also for me as somebody who's involved in the issue, fruitful conference. I hope we stay in contact and work together on this issue because it's totally clear Brexit is not done. It's a long-standing story. Thanks a lot and all the best.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le député.
Thank you, sir. I think you have had the final say and summed up very well. So I too would like to thank those who've organised this conference and put in so much hard work to make it a success. Thank you very much.